I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for being here. My name is Mauricio Font. I'm director of the Bildner Center. Really great pleasure to see you all, and a greater pleasure also to see Carmelo Mesa-Lago. And Professor Mario Gonzalez-Corso will be introducing him, so all I want to say is thank you. Open the proceeding. We will ask Mario to use maybe 3 to 4 minutes to present Carmelo, and then we will have Carmelo. We'll ask him to do maybe 45 minutes if he can. If not, we'll go over, and then we'll have a question and answer. There are 8 copies, 7 now, of the book. Carmelo, the publisher did not send more than the number. They sent 12. 5 already went. If you want a copy of the book, you better hurry up, and at some point they are for sale outside for $26. It's worth it. This is the book Carmelo is going to be. Is this my copy? No.
This is mine.
Voy a mostrar el tuyo.
Sí, muestra lo que tú quieras.
This is the book, and we of course recommend it greatly, and you will be sorry if you do not take the opportunity. Carmelo will sign copies that you may acquire. Mario.
Sí.
So,
Once again,
let me say one more thing.
Okay,
This small event was organized by Mario. Carmelo is an old friend. He has been here a few times. But this particular event was organized by our good friend Mario from Lehman College, associate professor in economics. And we all owe him a debt of gratitude for having put this together. So Mario, gracias.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Bildner Center. I have a very limited amount of time to really say a lot about our presentation and about Carmelo. But let me begin by saying that today's event is part of the Cuba Futures Initiative, which is basically an interdisciplinary and collaborative effort that we have initiated at the Bildner Center under the guidance of Mauricio Font, who many of you know has been leading the Bildner Center for many years, and the Cuba Project for also a very long time. What the Cuba Futures Initiative aims to do is to bring a systematic, rigorous study of the changing landscape in Cuba, not only the economy, but the whole entire socio-economic landscape. So I wanted to tell you that today's presentation is titled Raúl Castro, Socio-Economic Reforms, Evaluation of Results. This presentation will be based on the latest book by Professor Carmelo Mesa-Lago, his latest book on Cuba, which is titled in Spanish, Cuba en la era de Raúl Castro, Reformas Económico-Sociales y sus Efectos, published by Editorial Colibrí in Madrid, in Spain. We're very pleased and very happy to have with us Carmelo Mesa-Lago, and so I would like to welcome him and his wife Elena with a round of applause. Thank you. Again, we're honored to have Carmelo here. Carmelo Mesa-Lago, I know the name and his work is known to most of you. He's a distinguished service professor emeritus of economics and Latin American studies at the University of Pittsburgh. He's an author of 82 books and pamphlets and 275 articles and chapters published in 7 languages in 34 countries. These are on the Cuban economy, on social security, comparative economic systems, as well as the founder and editor for 18 years of Cuban Studies. And most of us who are familiar with the field of Cuban studies know that Carmelo is, I'm going to risk by saying this, that he's probably one of the grandfathers or the founding fathers of Cuban studies as a field of study abroad. His most recent books include Market, Socialist, and Mixed Economy, Comparative Policy and Performance. This was published back in 2002 by Johns Hopkins University. Another book is Cuba's Aborted Reform, Socioeconomic Effects, International Comparisons and Transition Policies. This was published with Jorge Perez Lopez. And then Reassembling Social Security, published by Oxford University Press earlier this year. And of course, the book that we're discussing today, that he will be presenting today, which is Cuba en la era de Raúl Castro, Reformas Económico-Sociales y sus Efectos, published by Editorial Colibrí. Professor Mesa-Lago has worked as, through Latin America and the Caribbean as a regional advisor for ECLAC, which is a very distinguished think tank affiliated with the United Nations. He's been a consultant with most international financial institutions, also with several UN branches and national foreign foundations. As the past president of the Latin American Studies Association, he's a member of the National Academy of Social Insurance and has received many distinguished prizes. Quite frankly, a lot of accomplishments really to mention in such a brief period of time. Professor Mesa-Lago is well known in his field, and we are once again delighted to have him here. So I'm going to yield the floor to Professor Mesa-Lago, who will discuss his new book on Cuba's economic reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you. Well, I'm sorry I am like this, but I was freezing for 2 days, and now this is very warm here. So I feel more comfortable this way. Well, first of all, I want to express my sympathy with the city of New York for this horrendous tragedy that you have suffered and still are suffering. And also thank for this miracle, because this presentation is incredible. And this is due to Mauricio, to Mario, also Rosalina and Jonathan. And in half an hour, I didn't have a PowerPoint. He put it together in half an hour. So many, many thanks. The book is going to be published in English with the same title, and the co-author was Jorge Perez Lopez, and will be published by Lynn Reiner in June of next year. Okay, now this is the structure of the book. First, there is an overview of economic and social development in Cuba for the whole period of the revolution. And we are discussing this in terms of cycles, away from the market and towards the market. And the latest cycle, which is the one that we are going to discuss today, is toward the market, is the most important one in the 54 years of the revolution. These are Raúl Castro reforms. Now, one question that we may have is, why these reforms? And in order to explain that, then we have the next 3 chapters, the one dealing with the domestic economy, the second one with international economic relations, and the third one is social welfare. And I am going to summarize very briefly with some figures what happened here. And then Raúl reforms, and there are different types of reforms, we will see that. And then the most important chapter, in my view, is the last one, in which we try to assess the effects or the impact of all the reforms. Now, the first, in terms of the domestic economy, Cuba had a GDP growth peak of 11% in the year 2006, and then have been going down. These are figures for last year. As you can see, it was the lowest economic growth in Latin America except for El Salvador. Something quite important, not this figure, but something quite important is that the composition of GDP, about 60% of GDP are other services, excluding water, electricity, etc. And so it's a huge social service sector, which, by the way, is slowly declining as a result of Raúl reform. Now here you have the capital formation, which is quite important because at higher the percentage of capital formation in terms of GDP, more the possibility of economic growth. And you can see all these graph and series start compared with 1989, which is the year before the crisis, and then you get the year before Raúl, the most recent data that we have. And you can see how these have declined from 25% in 1989 to about 9% in 2011. And this is the index of industrial production. And this is an index, so this is 100%. And you can see that it goes down to 43, which we are talking about 57% lower than the year prior to the crisis. These are important indicators of the sugar industry. because we cannot connect all this, but this is telling you where production, this is the agricultural yield. As you can see, there was a very significant decline from 60 to about 20%. And this is the production of sugar, and of course, you see a significant decline there. And this is the industrial yield in the process of extracting sugar from the sugar cane. And once again, this is 1989, which was 68%, and it goes down here to 26%. I have followed series of agricultural production, industrial and manufacturing. In mining is the best performance of the revolution. We are talking about oil, nickel, and gas. But what you have is a peak and then a decline. Of course, compared with 1989, the increase is phenomenal. But there is a peak and then there is a decline and stagnation. Manufacturing is pretty bad. Most products declining related to 1989, and agriculture is the worst. And so these are international trade and economic relations. The book has 336 pages, so this is a very brief summary of the whole thing. This is your trade balance of goods. This is negative, right? Everything under this line is negative. So you have deficit, consistent deficit throughout all this period here. This, on the other hand, are services. And as you can see, there is a significant surplus. $5 billion from Venezuela, only to buy professional services from Cuba. And then the result of that, this is the global combining goods and services, is that it was negative here, but it's improving, and it's improving essentially because of increasing the payments of services, because this is flat, this is stagnant. Okay, and these are international tourism. Notice that the peak, this is the number of tourists in blue, and this is gross revenue, because you have to subtract from that the value of inputs. And you can see the huge increase from 89 to this year, but the peak is here in terms of gross income. And then there is some increase in the number of tourists. And this is the hotel's occupancy. And it goes down from 64 in 2005 to 57 in 2010. So you get more tourists, but you have a lower occupancy rate. And this gives you some idea about Cuban dependency on Venezuela. This is only trade of goods, not services. If we weren't going to include services, it would be 6-7 times higher than this, the dependency. These are only goods, merchandise. And as you can see, Venezuela has 40% of total Cuban trade. The following two countries, very, very small, China, Canada. We are talking about 12 and 6% each. And this is a very important indicator. This is your average salary, which appears in blue, from 1989 to 2010, and it's adjusted for inflation. So we are talking about real salary, adjusted for inflation. And you can see that it goes down, even if there is a recovery. By 2010, this is 72% below the purchasing power in 1989. And pensions a little better. we're talking about halves. So we are discussing now social welfare, and this is quite interesting, gender differences. You can see that women and men have the same percentage of population, but women in red have very higher education than men. But in all other indicators of employment, women are below men. These are data for 2010. But by the way, all this is data from keywords. And now here, you have two important indicators, so health indicators, and this is infant mortality. Once again, I cannot link this because there are years in between, but you can see that it declines very sharply from 1989, and it continues to decline. So infant mortality is a great success. On the other hand, maternal mortality, this is 1989, goes up and is considerably higher. And we may discuss why. You have one going down and another one going up in the discussion. Okay, and the Cuban population is aging, and it's aging very quickly. This area here that you see in have to excuse me, but as I said, the PowerPoint was on just before entering here. So that the blue is, this is a young tail, 0 to 14. This is your productive age from 15 to 59. And this is people above 60. And you can see how this is increasing. Actually, the projection for 2025 is that 26% of the population will be older than 60. 26% compared to 9% in 1970. This is very important because it's increasing considerably the costs of healthcare and pensions. It's an aging society, and what is happening is that this sector, which is the productive sector, which is financing these two tails, the youngest and the oldest, is contracting. While the young tail is also contracting, but the old tail, which is much more expensive, is expanding. And then the final indicator is housing. And this is the number of houses built. This was a record, 110,000. It's a historical record. But this is the number of houses built in 1989. And as you can see, it's going down. And this is the ratio of houses built per 1,000 inhabitants. So you can see that this goes down. There is a peak here, and then it goes down considerably. The decline is from a ratio of 6 per 1,000 to 2.8 per 1,000. All right, so this, I think, is the reason why the reforms are absolutely necessary. I mean, if there is no other alternative, Raúl will have to do this reform. And the reforms are in the direction of the market. So let's now look at the reforms. I have tried to classify, because you have had a lot, not even all of them are here, but I have tried to classify this into three groups. And they go in order of importance. These are the least important ones. These are of medium importance. I call this administrative, because it's dealing with, for instance, merging of ministries and stuff like that. Renewal of profesionamiento empresarial, but we don't have data to assess that, etc. And these are important reforms, but not as important as the next one, which are the ones that we are going to discuss, which I call structural reforms. So you have them there. And the first one is the updating of the economic model. This began in 2011 with the Six-Party Congress. This is extremely difficult. I mean, Cuba has, because basically Cuba is keeping the centralized plan system. And this has been tried for more than half a century. And it has been tried in other countries. And other socialist economies like China have moved considerably closer, there is no comparison at Vietnam than Cuba. Of course, this is ongoing, it's very recent, it's impossible to do an evaluation of that. The next one is the end of rationing. I will refer a little bit to this later, but this is pending. Rationing have not been eliminated. Steps have been taken to reduce its importance, but it's not gone. And the same thing is the elimination of monetary duality, because there are two currencies in Cuba, the national peso, CUP, and the convertible peso, CUC, and it creates all kinds of problems in the economy. And this is a priority, but extremely difficult, because you cannot really unify these two currencies unless you have a significant increase in production and productivity. Now, we are going to discuss in detail the next structural reform. I don't have time for migration, but if you want, I study the law, and we can include that in the discussion, but here I don't have time, unfortunately, to do that. So let's start with the usufruct. How much time have I spent already?
You have consumed 10 minutes. So
10 minutes already?
You have consumed, yes.
Okay, that's good. All right, okay. So, let's start with usufruct. I think this is the most important of the reform. Why? Because look, when you look at China and Vietnam, for centuries these countries suffered from hunger. They didn't produce enough to feed the population that they had. Now, not only they are self-sufficient, but they are exporting. They are exporting food. Actually, Vietnam is exporting about 500,000 tons of rice to Cuba, which could be produced in Cuba. So the point is that if you do the proper agricultural reform in Cuba, then you could be, in a relatively short period of time, with the experience that we have from these other two socialist countries, be self-sufficient and be able to export. And this is crucial for Cuba. And it's in a lot of species of Raúl. So what is the most important measure that Raúl has done is usufruct. It means that either state land is given to individuals, cooperatives, and state farms for production. Now, the land ownership is not transferred, but that doesn't matter. In China and Vietnam, the land ownership was not transferred either. But it's a contract. There is a contract between the usufructuario, the person that receives the land, and the state. And how much? Well, you have the first, it's 1.2 million hectares, and almost 150,000 people received land by the end of 2011. So that's a considerable. Very few idle land is left and is in the process of being distributed. Most of it have been done. However, second very important thing, only from 33 to 54, depending on the source, of that land distributed in usufruct is not in production. So there is a problem there. I mean, they receive the land, but something happens that they are not producing. And we will go into that. Now, how can we measure the impact of usufruct? What happened with agricultural production? I mean, the idea is you give this land to individuals, they have an incentive, they make money with this, and therefore there is an increase in production. But in 2000, this began in 2008. And in 2010, there was a decline of agricultural production by 5%. And the preliminary figures that we have for 2011, there's tables and a big discussion on this in the book, there is a decline also. So far, although the measure goes in the right direction, something is not happening, not a significant proportion of the land is not in production, and agricultural output nationally have declined for 2 consecutive years. Another figure that shows us the problem is that sales of agricultural in agricultural markets, these are markets, free markets, fell by 19% in volume in 2011. So those figures are consistent, all of them. Now, what are the good news here? Okay, the good news is that the state cultivated land and production contracted. Out of 14 most important products, declined in 9 and increased only in 5. On the other hand, state cultivated, non-state, that means private farmers, cooperatives, and usufructus, there is not this disaggregation of the figures. So we don't know which one, but we figure perhaps it's usufruct because it's the one expanding. Both land and production is increasing. And you can see that out of these 14 products, increasing 11 and declining only 3. So this is a positive note, although the national aggregates so far are negative. And I said, in order to do the proper assessment, you have to know what is in this non-state agricultural sector, because all is this lumped together. We want to know what is usufructus, separated from the rest. And then, okay, this usufructo workers are receiving credit with some limitations, and they are allowed for the first time to open bank accounts, which is true of self-employment also. Now, I want to make an analysis of the new law. It was enacted, was published in the Official Gazette a few days ago, October 22nd. It doesn't start to operate until December. And I try to analyze this in terms of what is similar in this law with what we had before, because it was a previous law. Second, what are the improvements of this law? And then what are the obstacles, both old and new, in terms of usufructo? So let's start with the similarity. The land size is the same. The parcel is very small, 13.4 hectares. It can be increased to 67 hectares if this usufructo worker becomes, and this is mandatory, tied with either a state farm or a cooperative. And they are supposed to do that in order to get inputs, services, and the commercialization of their produce. So it's not specifically mandatory, but it is mandatory. So once you do that, it can increase to 67 hectares, which is important. What is similar is that the contracts continue to be 10 years only. This is a very short period of time. In fact, in China and Vietnam, you have contracts for an indefinite period of time. They can be extended for another 10 years. But notice also quite interesting that if the usufructuario is a state farm or a cooperative, used to have 20 years rather than 10, and now it's increased by the law to 25 years. So there is a significant preference of the state for state farms and cooperatives vis-a-vis individuals. Production must start in 6 months, but taxes begin immediately. And there is a clause in both laws, the old and the new one, in which says that it has to be rational and sustainable. And who decides that? The government decides when production is rational and sustainable. Notice that these are very broad terms. So there is a lot of discretion here left to the government. And they have to fulfill obligations. And one of the obligations is a copy. A copy means that part of the crop have to be sold to the state at a price set below the market price. So that means this is a disincentive in the view that I see. And then the contract ends if there is a violation and infringement of the duties. Now, what are the improvements of the law, of this 2012 law? There was a big discussion in Cuba about investment, which in Spanish is called bienhechurias. And the problem was that the old law was obscure in terms of what happened with this investment. Particularly, the contract is canceled or is not renewable. Now, before, a usufructuario couldn't build a home or a stable for the animals or a shack to keep their equipment. Now they are allowed to do so. In fact, they can have more than one home because family workers can have, if there are several, maybe the law doesn't have set the limit. So maybe 1, 2, 3 homes built. And this is very important because before, this person have to come maybe from far away to the place where the land was and it couldn't protect animals and equipment and crops. from robbery. Now, I think this is a very positive and important thing in the new law. The law also says that the state may sell or rent those investment of beneficiaries to the usufructuarios. And the state does the assessment, the value of this investment that are transferred or sold is set by the state. And also, he or she can expand, improve, and build new facilities. So that's quite positive too. And then, although the law doesn't say this directly, indirectly, there are hereditary rights that didn't have before. So that if the person dies or becomes incapacitated, his family workers, not all family relatives that are working the land, can receive these beneficiaries. Okay, now what are the obstacles? And this is a combination of the old and the new law. The parcel is too small, continues to be very small, although there is this possibility of expansion. And notice this, I couldn't believe this. I made that calculation 3 times. The percentage of the land, of the parcel that can be devoted to this beneficiary, to this investment, is 0.13%. This is nothing. You understand? Because we are talking here, about they can be woods, they could be fruit trees, they could be permanent plantations, and a lot of things besides buildings. So that's a problem. And then marabou, which is a weed, extremely difficult to clean, must be clean. More than half of the land given has marabou. But the credit that the government gives cannot be applied for cleaning marabou. Other things, but not that. And the state says in the law that the person that receives the land must have the skills, physical and mental, in order to produce the land, to till the land. And there is some possibility for training there. That's a positive side. You won't believe, I cannot go into this, the complexity of the regulations in the new law about how to go in terms of requesting land, requesting a renewal of a contract, requesting approval for investment. It is pages of the decree law, the reglamento, the regulations. It's extremely complex. That is a major problem. Okay, so we move into the second major point. I will have to cut some of this because it's impossible. And this is dealing with the issue of state workers' dismissal. Now, for many years, I have been claiming that there was hidden unemployment in Cuba. Actually, when I wrote my dissertation in 1968, one chapter of the whole dissertation was devoted to that. Now, this is officially recognized by the government. And actually, what you have here, this is the official open unemployment rate, which is 2.5. There was a year before, it was 1.6 full employment. But what happens if you add to this open unemployment the estimated hidden unemployment? These are workers that are not really needed in the state sector, and the government need to dismiss them because they cost money and they are not really necessary. So there were 3 figures here. The first one was by March of 2011, 500,000 state workers should be dismissed. By the end of December 2011, 1 million. But then there is another figure that was given by an important authority in Cuba that said 1.3 million. So if you estimate, based on the labor force, how many workers are hidden here with these 3 estimates, that open unemployment of 2.5 increases to 12.3 with 500,000, to 22 with 1 million, and with almost 28% was 1.3 million. This is the real unemployment rate. If we were able to dismiss all these workers which are not needed, that's what happened. Unless, and here comes, in order to do this, the government has to create jobs, they say, in the non-state sector. Mostly it means self-employment and members of cooperative in services. With usufructos too, because that's jobs. Not only usufructuarios, but family members that are working the land. Now, what you see here is what happened in terms of the dismissal. Actually, only 140,000 people were dismissed. That was only 14% of the target for the year 2011. And the date for those dismissals was postponed to the year 2014. And for this year, only 170,000 dismissals, which is 34% of 500,000 and 70% of 1 million that were supposed to be dismissed last year in December. So obviously, not enough people are dismissed because also you have here, the reason is that the creation of non-state jobs is well below the target of 501 million employees. So you have self-employment, 147,000, this is the net, not counting what you have before. And then for 2011, 209,000, which is 18%, of which only 18% were unemployed. The other people were pensioners, were people that have previous business, but those who were really unemployed, that this is the important thing because the government have to dismiss people and then they have to get employed in the non-state sector, only 18% of them were. So this is not working. Not enough jobs in the non-state sector are created, and that is a barrier for the government. Most important policy of dismissal of unneeded work. Service cooperative, you have 1,500 barbers and hairdressers and 222 activities approved in 2012. We don't have full figures, unfortunately, for this year. Now, what are the improvements of this reform? Well, you have more occupations, 192 self-employed. No family employees are allowed in all 190 occupations. That's important because only before family members were allowed to be employed. Increase the number of chairs in these tiny restaurants, paladares. Allowed to sell and rent to state entities. And also credit from the government and suspension of some taxes in 2011. What are the obstacles? And here comes the problem. We saw obstacles in usufructo. Now, what are the obstacles for this reform to be successful? Well, these 192 occupations are too specific. And most of them, 90%, 95% of them are unskilled. You know, like people parking cars in the street or looking at the cars, or people attending black baths in hotels, and these are unskilled occupations. And too specific. And university professors, university graduates are not allowed to perform their own occupational trade. They can do something else. Taxes are huge, and let me just give you an example. There is a tax that increases with the number of employees by a self-employed occupation, which is absurd because you want more people employed. But as you increase the number of employees, the tax goes up. So it's a disincentive for employing people. It doesn't make any sense. And well, you have the reason there that they believe in property concentration and wealth concentration and stuff like that. Well, I obviously I can't continue with this because I don't have time. So that's what I have. 10 minutes.
15. Okay. So let me go into this. This is very close to my heart because, you know, my second field of work is social welfare.
but obviously I don't have time to do that. So, if I can summarize this, there is a plan to reduce gratuities. For instance, workers' cafeterias. There is a plan to gradually increase wages. Nominal wages has increased, but the problem is that when you adjust them to inflation, they are 72% of what they were in 1989. And the most important thing is social services must be curtailed because they are unsustainable. What you see here is that the cost of social services in Cuba was 53% of the state budget and 34% in GDP. There is no country in Latin America that have anything closer to this figure. So it's huge, the cost of this. And because of aging, health and pension costs are going to increase. So you have a major, major problem here. Now, I'm sorry, but I cannot go into this. You can see slight decline in the percentage of foreign cost of service expenditure in 1 year in relation to the previous year, and this is as percentage of GDP. So some of them are declining. So pensions are stagnant, as you can see. This is a major problem, but the others, particularly education, and this is and health. Education is explained because the young population, 0 to 14, is declining. So enrollment is declining in absolute numbers. You can afford that, but the others are problematic. I can't go into this. You know what the cuts in education are, in pensions, in healthcare, in housing. But let me show you something. You reduce social services. You reduce gradually rationing. I didn't have time to go into that. I mean, rationing have not been eliminated, but a lot of food stuff have been taken out of the libreta of the rationing system, and the prices have increased significantly in terms of food, but also in terms of public utility. So if you do that and you dismiss 1 million people, the target for 14 is 1.8, you have a major problem, a major social problem, unless the other reforms work. So social assistance is essential, what we call a social safety net. Because if the idea of the government, and it's the right one, is that rather than subsidizing the prices of goods through the rationing system, in which both very wealthy people and very poor people both have the same goods, doesn't make any sense, because rich people or relatively wealthy people don't need this. So shift from subsidies to goods to subsidies to people, meaning targeting the poor and providing social assistance to them. Okay, the problem with this is look what happened with social assistance. You have a significant decline here. This is when Raúl began in 2010, and the most important decline is in 2010, and 2009 and 2010. And these are expenditures, also declining significantly. So this doesn't make any sense to me, except lack of resources. But if you want to avoid social unrest, you have to expand social assistance, and the opposite is happening. We don't have the data for 2011. Okay, and sorry, sales of home and automobiles, I have some figures there, but I cannot go into this. So let me finish. If you want to read the whole thing, buy the book.
And we have the discussion, so.
And we have the discussion.
Yeah, good opportunity.
Okay, now.
It's in Spanish.
No, you're going to have the English version in June of next year, edited with Jorge, co-authored with Jorge Perez Lopez, published by Lynn Reiner. It's in the process of printing now.
Excellent.
Okay, now what are my conclusions? Remember, we have this list of reforms by order of importance. What happened is that, by the way, all the reforms are in the proper direction. So there is no problem with that. The reforms are in the proper direction. But what about the results? Okay, these administrative and non-structural reforms were at the top of the list. You remember there were two blocks there. These are the less complex and the less important, and they generally have positive results. Unfortunately, I couldn't give you examples of it. On the other hand, most key structural reforms, which are more complex and important, have not been successful up to now. Usufructus, dismissal of workers, creation of non-state jobs, the restructuring of social services, etc. Okay, now updating the economic model, you cannot assess that because this began in 2011, but if you look at the previous half a century, this didn't work. And you look at other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, it didn't work either. And China has made a complete different type of reform than Cuba, considerably more profound and wider. So the chances are that this won't work. And we may expect in the future a change of this. The second point is that despite usufruct, agricultural output fell in 2010 and 2011. There were important improvements in this law this year, but also there are significant obstacles that are impeding full success of the usufruct. Dismissal of state employees and creation of private jobs goals have not been met. Too many limitations, excessive taxes, and state control. The gradual increase in nominal salaries, there are different, I couldn't go into this, there are different techniques to do this. Unfortunately, the three more important techniques or policies to increase nominal salaries, no results have been published for 2 years. So we cannot evaluate, for instance, pay by results, which is a key reform. Destajo in Spanish. And then you have less social assistance, despite the fact that it should be expanding, and the poverty is increasing. There is no doubt about it, although we don't have statistics. And this can provoke a dangerous social situation. So my conclusions. Oh, I'm sorry. I have two more, but I didn't discuss them to forget about it. By the way, if you want, we may discuss migration. I have all the information, but I couldn't go into this. So Raúl reforms are positive, and they are well oriented, but they are partial, they are slow, they go bit by bit, they are full of inner problems and conflicts. The measure is a positive one, but you put so many regulations and controls and taxes, and then it doesn't work. And they are insufficient to solve, as they are now, these socio-economic problems that were accumulated in more than half a century of socialism, which I show you just what happened in the last 6 years under Raúl. And the design of and this is quite important, the design of the reform is showing to me, this of course is my interpretation, an educated guess, that there is no unity in the leadership. This is a major problem. You have people, I don't have any doubt that Raúl wants to go ahead with the reforms, but there are people that are orthodox and they don't want the reforms because not only for ideological reasons alone, but for conflicts of interest. Let me give you an example so you can understand what I am talking about. The government authorizes paladares, which is small restaurants, and increases the number of chairs, etc. Allow employees which are not family members. That's very positive. If you go to a paladar in Cuba, most of them anyway, the food is good. It's more expensive than the state restaurants, but most of the state restaurants suck. The service is terrible, the food is awful, and so the state administrator of that restaurant is not interested in an expansion of the paladares. That's what I mean by an inner conflict. I mean, these bureaucrats doesn't want this because their jobs is imperative. These people are competing with them, and they are losing clients to the paladares, the private sector. Until that lack of unity in the leadership is not solved, and I cannot go into this, it's impossible, then the reforms won't be able to go ahead and be successful. Thank you very much.
So now, thank you again. Another round of applause for Professor Mesa-Lago, please. For synthesizing so much wealth of information under the stress of the limited time that we have. Now we'll take a few minutes and Mauricio Font will make a few comments as the discussant, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session.
Yeah, well, the main comment is that this book really cements Cap's a long and very productive career in studying Cuban society. And Carmelo started writing books about Cuba in 1959, Carmelo?
Yeah, 1959.
He's authored 30 monographs on different aspects of the Cuban society, mainly the economy. He's written 130 articles or main articles on these, many of them dealing with Cuba. And therefore, what this volume and this presentation today synthesizes a lot of this previous work, and it's really a capstone contribution to Cuban studies. I think what I would add to that, Carmelo, as a question to you, given this long perspective where you have been a very hard-nosed, critical, but almost always in trying to be as constructive as possible, even and especially in current times, and you have been not well understood sometimes. But given all that history, let's put all that behind. Are you optimistic that Cuban studies is not a new phase? The study of the Cuban economy. You went to Cuba recently under the invitation of Espacio Laical. You had not been there very frequently. You had been there 4 or 5 times before. To do most of your research was away. Are you satisfied that, at least in terms of understanding Cuban society and Cuban economy, we now begin to have more data and perhaps the possibility of collaborative relations with Cuban economists from the Havana and Cuban counterparts of different policymakers and so on and so forth? So that's the first question. And it's a comment as well. The second question that I would have is, in your conclusion to this volume, you list, I believe it is 17 reforms that you then recommend after you conclude your analysis of the current reforms and your assessment of them and what the problems are that you just synthesized. And then you go on to specify 17 reforms and that's a lot of reforms. My question is, there's no way Raúl Castro or anyone, and even a democratic or non-democratic regime, can implement that many reforms in a short period of time. Given that Cuba does not have a whole lot of time to make the reforms that you point out, what would be the most essential set of reforms that you would recommend for the Cuban policymakers to adopt? And lastly, and you alluded to this, you alluded to the struggle between reformers and orthodox in Cuban society. I think many other authors have dwelled on the debate within Cuba and the possibilities of continuing and expanding that debate. Are you optimistic that the Cuban society, the Cuban economy will be able to really stay on course and make the necessary changes before Raúl Castro's term is over? He himself pointed out there will be a limit from this point on to 10 years or 2 terms. Are you optimistic that given this huge agenda that I have not seen anyone do in 10 years or 8 years or will be able to accomplish it? So it's kind of question of scenario. Again, I don't want to monopolize the discussion. These are huge questions. If you can just touch on them now, and then perhaps we'll open to questions from the audience to expand on this wonderful volume. Again, lots of statistics, lots of analysis, the meticulous, critical, hard-nosed trademark of Carmelo Mesa-Lago and applied to the current times in Cuban society. And I'll stop there and ask Carmelo to respond perhaps a little bit to those questions.
Okay, I do believe that is this working?
Yeah.
I do believe that the quality of data and the analysis of data and information on Cuba is not something that came up recently. I think this has been a gradual process. And if you ask me, what are one of the things that you are more proud in your life as an academic is that the Cuban scholars have acknowledged that my work have contributed to increase the quality of the discussion. Because before it was extremely polarized and ideological, not supported by evidence, and gradually this has changed. I have excellent relationship with Cuban economists, academics. The book is endorsed by 4 of them. Omar Berleni, the head of the Centro de Estudio de la Economía de Cuba, Pavel Vidal, Rafael Hernández,
Temas.
director de temas. So this is extremely important for me. And this book is the most comprehensive compendium of Cuban economists, scholars' thought. I mean, there is nothing like this.
In the present.
I'm sorry?
Of the present. In the present.
Oh yeah. I mean, there is a summary of all the number of citations of Cuban economists is enormous in the book. And by reading the book, you can learn, if you don't know, what the thoughts of the Cuban economists are. And I am proud also to have co-authored for the first time an article with a Cuban economist, Pavel Vidal Alejandro, which just came out last year. So,
And Espacio Laical published one of your articles?
well, this is another thing. I mean, I have been publishing in Catholic Church magazines for years. First in Vitral, Espacio Laical, Convivencia, etc. And also in Temas. I mean, the analysis of social services, which I couldn't go, was fully published last year in Temas, which is the most important social science journal in Cuba. So this is extremely important. And then there is a much better and fluid relationship between Cuban scholar economists and scholars abroad. Not only economists, but other social scientists as well. Now, you are asking, there are 17 reforms. How much can be done in such a short period of time? Because we're talking about 6 years. Really, the speech that opens the reform is 2007, and then there is a national debate that takes 1 year. So we're talking about 2007, 2008, at the oldest. Okay, how can we say that? The only way to compare this is to compare Cuba with China and Vietnam. And then you can see that in a very short period of time, the most important for me reform, and the first reform, which is agriculture, was done in a relatively short period of time. We're talking about 5 or 6 years. And, the oil usufructus, this began in 2008. So we're talking about 4 years. And, a law has been enacted and will begin to be enforced in December. I mean, this is going too slow, not deep enough. And I have pinpointed some of the problems, okay? Which are the most important? Well, I rank the reforms by their order of importance, right? And I try to discuss with you the obstacles and improvements of the most important 5. Unfortunately, they have time to do that, but you can get a economist projection usually go wrong. And therefore, all these models, etc. I would like to be optimistic. I am a Cuban immigrant, but I feel for Cuba. And I wish that these reforms are successful. Contrary to other people that have a different point of view, they let the Cubans suffer. I don't think this is proper, this is human. And therefore, I am for the reforms. I have always been for the reform. I have always been for the reform. I support the Cuban economy, the Catholic Church, the opening, some little glassnode that is going on there. This is debatable, but I cannot do a prediction. And the problem is, Raúl is what, 81 now? Mm-hmm. Is he 81? I have a very short period to end these reforms. And at the path and rhythm that these reforms are going, I don't see how he will be able to accomplish this and the obstacles that he's facing. And the thing is, what is going to happen after he dies? I don't have any idea, but this is not going to be an easy transition like from Fidel to Raúl. there is going to be a fight there because there is no design successor. And so the time is running short, and I become very anxious about this, believe me, because I said, I can't say from whom. I got a letter from somebody who is for democracy, but he's also for socialism, democratic socialism. And he's writing, not for Cuba, he's temporarily abroad, and he's saying, Carmelo, I am very sad. The reforms are not working. The conservatives are taking position. And I am reading this and say, oh my God, it cannot be. Now,
It's a letter from Cuba.
it's a letter from a Cuban that is out and will be back. And he's writing me, I cannot say from where, and telling me this. And I know this person. I have reading a lot. I know what his orientation is. And I believe what he's saying. And it makes me considerably worried about the future.
Okay, so we're gonna move into the Q&A session, post discussion, and what we're gonna do is just follow the same format that we normally do here at the Bildner Center. So we'll take a set of 3 questions. Please keep your questions very short, very brief. We want to give Professor Carmelo Mesa-Lago as much time as we can to respond to your questions, which are pretty complex. So to be fair, I'm going to take a question here from Samuel, a second question from this side over here, this gentleman here, and then the gentleman in the back over there. Samuel?
Right. Thank you. Carmelo, thank you for a very stimulating presentation, very informative. My question is about the last point about conflicts in the leadership. You talked about that honor and the state restaurant. If we take that to the higher level, where is the conflict? Is it the party versus the army economists, or is it the managers of the joint venture enterprises who are going? In my opinion, that's where the power is going to be, not in the small usufructuarios or southern players. These people, like in China, I think are going to take over, the people who are running the state enterprise. That's my point of view. What is important is your point of view, and not mine. So at the higher level, where is the conflict? That in this thing that is the black box that Cuban politics are, what is your informed opinion about where the conflict is?
Okay, so we'll take the second question from here, and then we can answer them. Go ahead.
Sí, el análisis que presenta Nova, que presentó la semana pasada, es un análisis que Cigarrillo Piñero lo ven, dice, esto es una cómica, Guajiro, pero lo tuyo, según tú lo presentas y según yo he leído algunas cosas tuyas, tiene mucho más lógica en términos de presentarlo a donde está ahora la decisión. Mi pregunta es, porque yo trabajo con inversionistas, y yo tengo mi retrato, todo inversionista, me tengo que dar callar porque es mi negocio. Pero mi pregunta es, ¿qué atracción para un inversionista hay ahora en Cuba?
Okay, so las inversiones. The next one, please.
Yes, Professor Mesa-Lago, I want to know, when you're talking about the impact over the economic sector, you consider that Cuba don't have fertilizer and another chemical to grow the, industrial agriculture business. You think the impact that the blockade have, they continue to make very serious damage, because when you're talking about China or Vietnam, of course they have communist system, but capitalist economic system. So how do you think about this affecting Cuba?
Okay, so 3 questions basically. Let me quickly sum it up. The first one is about the conflict that you mentioned at the end. The second one is about foreign investment, inversiones extranjeras. And the third one has to do, from the way that I read, about the agricultural sector and the embargo, access to inputs.
Carmelo, dame un segundito. Someone referred to Armando Nova's presentations. They are all on the website for the Bildner Center, both of them.
Yeah.
They were very substantial presentations. You can go there and enjoy reading all the information that was provided and discussed. We hope that Carmelo will also give us a PowerPoint that we can post. If not, we understand because this thing is a work in progress. But we hope that he does as well. So in any case, those presentations are available on the web.
All right,
Yo dije anteriormente una opinión mía.
You know, ya sé.
By the way, this is the first presentation of a book. You realize that?
Yeah, that's right. So
The
we're
first
honored.
presentation. And it's a miracle that we have this presentation.
Today,
Okay. All right. First, your question, Sam, is a very good one, and it's very difficult to answer. I believe that there are people in Cuba that are we're talking about the top leadership, that they are extremely afraid of the reforms for two reasons. Economic reforms mean decentralization of decision-making power. And as more they decentralize, less power is in the party, in the government. The army has economic power too, but it's a different role there. And therefore, they also are afraid of losing political power. As more sectors in Cuban society become relatively independent, because no one can be 100% independent from the government, become relatively independent, that they perceive that as a threat. And they also look at what happened in Central and Eastern Europe, and they say, if we decentralize too much too soon, no one is going to stop this. So this is the orthodox mentality. The problem with that mentality is that they are trying to preserve an economic system that have not worked for more than half a century. And the only way out of, and there have been all kind of tries. The first chapter of the book shows what happened in Cuba, 6, 7 different cycles, moving in zigzags like this, and failures. And therefore, it's like Arakiri, and then there is the ideology thing. Of course, I wonder how much this is ideology and how much this is power. If you decentralize, you're losing economic power, and you may be losing some political power as well. Okay, the second question. What attraction have foreign investors in Cuba? Okay. The problem is that Cuba have been reducing foreign mixed enterprises. If you look at the last 6, 7 years, you see a decline in the number of foreign enterprises. And the official explanation for this, more than once, from the Ministry of External Economy and International Relations, is we want investment only in the strategic sectors of the economy that we decide. That's oil, tourism, etc. And this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous because every sector in the Cuban economy needs foreign investment. And by the way, this is not what I am saying. All these Cuban economists in the Center for the Study of the Cuban Economy are saying this. We need investment everywhere, and they have published it. And let me give you now a very recent and concrete example of what we are talking about here. Okay, the Spanish oil company that was drilling in Cuba, but they have done previous experimentations that failed, and then they found a dry well. Okay, but Cuba is supporting Cristina Fernandez, the president of Argentina, when nationalizes this Spanish company. Now, you put yourself in the shoes of the Spanish investors, and they are saying, we have been investing in Cuba, we have been investing all this money, we have not had results, we kept trying, and Cuba is now defending. Why Cuba have to do that? Let it go. Just let it pass. You don't have to take a position. So what is the message that you are sending? It's not a positive one. Okay, now the third question. Look, I have been against the embargo since 1968 in public television in Cuba. 1968 in Miami.
No fácil.
That's not easy, my friend. Okay, now, but at the same time, I have proven that the embargo, it's not that is nothing. I mean, it creates problems, but these problems are not the fundamental problems of the Cuban economy. And it's not me who's saying that, it's Raúl. Raúl was saying, you're blaming imperialism and you're blaming the embargo, and you have to see what our internal errors and flaws are. The embargo creates nuisances, but this is not the major problem. The major problem is the economic system of Cuba, which is what Raúl is trying to change, and so far, not very clear results. And true what you are saying, the comparison with China, but Vietnam was under the embargo of the United States for many years, and it went into the economic reforms and it was successful. And then eventually, you have, of course, a lot of foreign investment, including from the US in those two countries. But again, in order to have foreign investment, you have to give securities and incentives to the foreign investors. I am not saying you're going to sell the country to foreign investors, no. But under the proper regulations, you should stimulate rather than disincentive foreign investment.
So we'll go for another round of questions. Let me begin on this side. This gentleman here, then Ted, and then I'll move on to that gentleman back there. Yes. So.
Professor, which template do you think that the reformers are trying to follow? You mentioned China and Vietnam, but at the same time you said that in agriculture, those two Asian countries were faster. I cannot claim any knowledge about Vietnam. I'm just a little less ignorant about China, but I remember Deng Xiaoping started his, I think it was 3 or 4 modernizations program in 1979, and it actually, for quite a while, it took quite a while to hold, and in this time, China is still a command economy. So don't you think that they are just trying to be cautious and because they definitely don't want to go Russia?
Okay. So it's a question about the kind of economic model. Ted.
Yes, Carmelo, you mentioned in your talk a couple times that you would be glad to talk about the migration reforms. So I want to give you the opportunity to do that. Specifically, if you could talk about the potential economic implications, possibly some of the economic reasons behind the reforms, and maybe some of the remaining limitations in the fine print in the law.
All right, and then the next question, please. Real brief, please.
Carmelo, your answer may be the answer that you gave to Sam, but I'm wondering, you mentioned there are 222 activities for cooperatives.
I'm sorry, could you?
There are 222 activities open for cooperatives. I wonder if any of them are in the commanding heights of the economy, or is that an area that's limited to cooperatives? In other words, cooperatives are all in the small, petty economy, the self-employed sector.
Okay.
Okay.
So just a quick summary. One is about which economic model, China, Vietnam, etc. The other one about the very complex migration issue, and the next one is about the cooperatives and self-employment.
Okay, now, listen, when you're talking about China and Vietnam reform, you're talking about a lot of different things. I mean, you cannot just say one reform. There are several reforms, investment, agriculture. But what I said, and I repeat here, is that for me, and for Cuba, and for China and Vietnam at the beginning, the first reform and the most important one is agriculture. I mean, if you solve the problem of food self-sufficiency in Cuba, it will be a monumental, step forward. When I am saying that it took relatively short period of time, maybe 1 year or 2 more than what Raúl have already spent in the usufructo thing, is when I'm talking about the result of agricultural reform. And that was very, very fast. And it was not done by, one single measure. But the key is this. All land can go to individuals, villages, families, cooperative. You have an indefinite contract. The state reserves the ownership of the land. But you can do whatever you want. And then there was the last thing that they did in China was because there were certain staples that were not included in free setting of prices. But eventually, even rice, they said, let the price be set by the market. And that, it was very successful, and it was in a short period of time. Okay, the second question, Ted, that's a big question. Actually, I was hoping to.
Another conference, maybe?
No, but I think it's important that I mention a couple of things about that, all right? All right. Okay, I compared the old law with the new law. And I found similarities and differences. Unfortunately, I cannot find my summary now.
Improvisa, chico, improvisa.
But look, this is important point. There are positive things in the migration law. For instance, you can have a passport. You don't need, if you are a Cuban, you only need a passport. The passport only costs you 100. By the way, the law says in national pesos or convertible pesos, which doesn't make any sense to me because everybody would pay cupo instead of CUC. And you don't need invitation from abroad, the white, all that is gone, okay? On the other hand, the passport is only for 2 years, renewable 2 years, and a maximum of 6. That's a very short period of time, okay? Now, there are a list of people excluded from getting a passport. And here is where we go. I can't go, but high government officials, important heads of enterprises, and they use a lot the word vital for the economy. And who defines vital? The government defines vital. And then if you are a graduate from the university or technical school, you neither can have a passport nor leave the country unless you are authorized. And believe me, the decree regulating this is one of the longest in the whole thing. Meaning controls the whole process. The person has to go, if you are a physician, for instance, because this is another one which is excluded, you have to ask permission to your chief. This guy goes to the head of the enterprise. At each level you have an analysis, right? And then it goes to Minin. And Minin is developing a database to check against the law what the antecedents of the person are. And believe me or not, I read this 3 times. You know who approves? The Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers approving a physician living in Cuba? This is absurd. This is another example of this desire of control and regulation. And then there is a big loophole there that says, and for other reasons that the state determines. Now, if you are a Cuban immigrant, you want to go to Cuba, still you need an entry visa. That has not changed. So there are things that have improved in the law. I cannot go in detail. As I said, I lost somewhere my summary. But what I can tell you is that the exceptions and the regulations are overwhelming. So what you are doing with the right hand, you are dismantling on the other hand with all these things. How much impact this is going to, or people, by the way, Cubans can go and be 2 years abroad. That's good, 24 months. But this is for the US. In terms of people going into Cuba, no change. It's the same. And then there was another question?
Cooperatives in the.
Yeah. I fully agree with you. I mean, the same story that we have with self-employment, we have with the cooperative. So you have barbers and hairdressers, and these are at the very low. We are not talking of high-skilled occupations. There are a few self-employment, middle-level skill occupations, like accountants, for instance. Okay, but most of them are unskilled, and some of them are ridiculous. You know, you peeler of fruits or oranges. I mean, that's one of 191.
Okay, so we're ready to move to round 3. Before we do that, just briefly, there's an announcement that we want to make to everyone here. So
Yeah, they just you know, another Cuban American prominent in New York, Arturo Farri, el hijo de Chico Farro, has a concert, right? And tonight, and he's at Symphony Space tonight and tomorrow, and he will include Afro-Cuban jazz and that sort of thing, because he does so well. And you're all invited, and it's all free, just like getting here today. And it's like yourself one more round. But tonight and tomorrow, right, John?
Tonight and tomorrow.
So Space is simply, that's Symphony Space.
94th and Broadway.
We still have more time we're not running questions, but before you begin to think about leaving, just think about that and checking out Arturo Farri.
Are you handing tickets?
No, it's free. So we have returning power to the moderator here.
okay, so our final round of questions. I'll take one here from Professor Crane, one from this side over here, and
Yeah, one there. Maybe take all of the questions.
this gentleman here, you had your hand up, and then one more over here. So that will be the order. We'll switch back and forth, please.
This is a follow-up to Samuel's question in terms of the internal debates on over the reforms, how to implement them, how fast, how extensive, etc. Recently, Raúl established Grupos de Trabajo, composed largely of economists, but with some other individuals, without any bureaucrats whatsoever.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Without what?
The
Any
bureaucrats.
bureaucrats whatsoever incorporated, right? The purpose is to transcend some of the impediments that have emerged to the reforms. For example, not only from within ministries, but also within the Politburo, the Council of State, etc. They will report directly to Raúl's office. To what extent, and they include all of the people that we know from SEC, but also from other institutions. To what degree do you think this effort to transcend some of the very knotty debates, as well as the resistance within certain institutions within the government, will actually have success? You know all of these individuals.
You are Margaret Graham, right?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I don't have my glasses. I recognize you by your voice. Okay.
So then we had another question over here, please.
Yes, I would like to have you emphasize the people under the age of 35 and what their future is. And one reason for this is I spent the last 4 summers in Berlin. There is still this gap between East Berlin and West Berlin. There is nostalgia for the old days where everyone had a job. And there are lots of people who refuse to leave East Berlin for any reason because West Berlin is too bourgeois. And I would like you to relate this to that huge hidden unemployment. So how do the young people feel about the future of Cuba?
Good question.
Good question. There was one more over here. One more over here.
It's a two-tier question. The first part is related to Cuentapropismo, self-entrepreneurship. it's being used in many different ways. They are making a bit of backbone of the reform on the one hand. On the other hand, it might be seen as a way to let the black market emerge, i.e. to regulate those professions that were prior unregulated. My question is two-tiered. One is the genealogy of the term cuenta propismo. Where does it actually come from? ¿De dónde viene la palabra cuenta propismo? It's not 1993, and it's not even 1978, the first opening up of cuenta propismo. And the second part is if you could talk a bit more about the black market and the impact eventually of cuenta propismo on the black market. A small example, Paladares opening up are increasing the price of pork. And pork is disappearing of agromercados, and it's being directly sold on the black market to the Paladares.
Okay, so then we had another question here.
I think we're going to have a session devoted specifically to Vietnam and its experience. I have a foot in both histories, and I think the process in Vietnam was more elongated and complicated than just what happened after the Six-Party Congress. And it's true the US embargo continued for another 7 or 8 years, but it was a relative, and it was useful when it ended in terms of US investment coming in, but it was not such a big political factor. The big political factor for Vietnam was China. That problem was solved when China invaded Vietnam, punished them for invading, and that relationship was resolved. China gave up its ambitions in Cambodia and its ambitions to control Vietnam. The problem with Cuba is how much, not the economic impact of the embargo, but the political impact of the embargo as a state of economic warfare that's coupled with a 20 million plus program of destabilization. How much is the fact that the hegemon for Cuba is still determined to force it in a certain direction, a factor in the internal dynamics, the political dynamics, the sort of allowing the people who resist change to say, well, we can't take that risk because it's not the question of Eastern Europe, it's the question of the US becoming a more overt threat.
Okay, and then Carmelo, I reserved my 2 questions for the end. I read a good portion of your book, and I'm interested, of course, in agriculture, which is a sector that I study in more detail. And one of the issues with the transfer of state-owned land to the non-state producers has been that some of the state farms are not declaring the land that they have. Mm-hmm. That's not, they're under-declaring, under-counting, or simply not declaring the land that they have. So my question was, if you in your research, if you found anything that's being done on the part of Cuba to address this issue, because that to me seems to be a major impediment, right, to the transition to a model where the non-state sector will account for a greater level of output in agriculture. Mm-hmm. And then my other area of interest is social insurance as well, which in the case of Cuba is directly connected to agriculture. And you mentioned the idea of subsidizing people or households, low-income households, rather than products, as it's been done through the libreta de racionamiento. So my question was, in your research, if you found any estimates of the fiscal burden of that, of shifting the system away from the libreta de abastecimiento to a system of direct subsidies, and if you have any experiences from Latin America that would be useful for Cuba. Those are my 2 questions. Thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone, but Carmelo, we still have a lot of questions to address. I can help you with them. Yep. So the first one was a follow-up about the debate. Okay, the internal debate.
Margaret, I think that this is a proper step, okay, because you are overcoming the bureaucracy, but this is something relatively new, on which we have, at least I am always looking at data, right? And I cannot assess whether this will become a major way for Raúl to circumvent the Orthodox or not. I need more information about that. This is very recent. I'm sorry, not that I am trying to elude your question, is that I cannot make a judgment without information and data. Okay, the people under 35. By the way, I just came back 2 months from Germany. I have been there many times, so I know from where the question came, I can remember. Okay, so I know what you're talking about. Young people in Cuba don't care. And this is a major concern because they are really fed up. I mean, they want to travel, they want to be able to go into the internet and see whatever they want. The weirdest things are happening with Cuban young people. I mean, they are in costumes and doing all kind of crazy things. And this is extremely important because one, and also you have music, right? Rap. A way through, I mean, you won't believe what these people say in their rap songs. But there have been an analysis of this, very careful analysis of this, of criticism. And one interesting thing, one common element in all Central and Eastern European countries, I know that there are significant differences with Cuba, but that this affection and lack of interest of young people was a common element in all of them. All right, now the next question.
It was about cuentapropismo.
Yeah, okay. I am not completely sure if you are asking from where the term cuentapropismo comes or from where in Cuba, what are the antecedents, the background cuentapropismo?
Where does it come from in Cuba?
Okay, in Cuba, right. There is a long history actually of self-employment. I mean, this is not new. In fact, self-employment began in the 1970s. And then it sort of, gradually disappeared. And then when the crisis hit, you get it in the 1980s. Oh, no. Cuenta propia is I work on labor and social security. This is a word used all over Latin America. Cuenta propia o cuentapropismo o trabajadores por cuenta propia.
So when was it assimilated into the Cuban social?
I am saying from in the mild reform of the 70s, you have cuentapropismo. In the 1980s, you have cuentapropismo, and Fidel began to criticize that some people were becoming rich. And then in the 1990s, when you get the crisis, then you get 157 occupations authorized. And it was booming. It was booming. And then, licenses were reduced significantly. Inspectors found all kind of things to blame, hygiene, whatever, violation of rules. And they think the best example is Paladares. The number of Paladares practically disappeared. I think only 1 or 2 that were disfrazados, whether it was a state or it was really private. So there is a long history about this. And one of the problems with this is uncertainty. Because, if you look at the past history, people say, this was approved in the 70s, then it was in the 80s, in the 90s. Is it going to happen again? I am not saying that it's going to happen again. I am saying that this is a concern of people to enter into this because it takes, time, money, etc. By the way, you mentioned that I went into Cuba. Actually, I went in 2010 and went with my family in 2011. And this year I was going to go in April. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and there were 4 days of interviews, was to talk to cuentapropistas. I have appointments with different type of cuentapropistas, with cooperative members, etc., etc. And I was invited again by the Catholic Church for an event. And 2 days before departure, there were 5 of us. We were informed that we could only be there for the 3 days of the event, plus the day of flying in and the day of flying out, that means that my 4 days of interviews went to hell, and I sent to hell the Cuban authorities too. Because, I mean, this is ridiculous. I have more.
You
right?
still, two more, including
Two
mine.
more. Okay. Oh, yeah.
You're not up to
Oh,
hook
sorry,
with me.
sorry. Oh, Vietnam, that's a very difficult question, and you talk about a lot of things that I don't know. Well, the economic impact and the political effect. Rafael Hernandez, the director of Temas, and other people in Cuba have said that actually the embargo reinforces the Orthodox because they argue that they have to have control and regulations to avoid a threat to Cuban security. And, you know, I think there are other reasons that I have discussed, but I think that is a very interesting point. I think it's a very interesting point to take into consideration. Mario, okay. I only found one information in grammar about what you said.
Only one article.
Only one article in which I can't even remember who was saying it. Maybe was Lugo that then it was in Mesa. I can't remember. But the point that he was making was there is a lot of land there that could be distributed in usufruct, but the state farms are not revealing what they have. And it's a problem because we don't know exactly now how much state land is in the state. And of course, the figure doesn't probably give you the whole picture, but only part of it. But look, let's look at how much they have distributed. I mean, they're talking about more than 2 million hectares. So even if the state land and the state farms are hiding land, I don't think this is a major problem. I mean, the way you can make more land available. By the way, one of the things that the regulations of usufructus is that one of the reasons for giving away the land is that it's full of marabou. It says in the law. But then you don't allow them to use state credit to clean it, which I mean, the first thing they have to do is to do that, and it's not easy. It's not easy because it's deep. If you leave some roots, it comes back. And then I lose my thread of thought.
You were saying the impact wasn't so significant anyway.
Yeah, no.
If they're hiding.
Yeah. All right, but once again, you have to do this properly. The other reason for giving away the land is that have low yields. So I mean, this means that the land that you are giving away is not the best land. Now maybe, and this is possible, a good part of the good land is in the state farms. That's a possibility, but I don't know. I mean,
that's what my question was saying. Right.
I don't know, but that's a possibility. Yeah. But they are not giving away the good land. The good land is reserved by state farms and the folks.
So that's bound to
they are giving away second-grade land and not facilitating some of the removal of the problems that they have.
So that explains some of the production issues, right? That
Yeah.
we found.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, social insurance.
Una pregunta más que voy a responder.
This is a very good question. I have.
Mauricio wanted to make a comment.
No, go ahead, Mario.
Can I?
No, it's the same question, actually.
Oh, all right, okay.
No, the question is, Carmelo was sharing with us that he just came back from Germany, and he's a very prolific scholar, and he's engaged in a comparative study of pension systems with how many countries? Four countries. Mm-hmm. Including Chile and what else?
Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and Hungary.
And then it has implications for Cuba. So we would.
No, I would say there are more implications for 10 Latin American countries that have privatized systems and about 10 Central and Eastern European countries that have privatized systems because this is a sort of reinforcement of the state role.
But it may have implications in terms of future options for Cuba, possibly. No.
Not really, because Cuba has a state system.
Yeah. In any case, we do want to extend, perdón, Elena, an invitation for you to, when that book comes out, We also do other things besides Cuba, and we would like to extend that the comparative discussion. So you're invited, Carmelo, to that discussion.
Next November.
And before I close here, let me say again, ladies and gentlemen, this is my last
I have
remark.
a question.
No, you do. You'll be just my last comment.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
shut up. It's just that what a great honor. Carmelo, for many of us, has to be the founding figure of Cuban studies.
The grandfather, he said.
The grandfather.
That's good.
And I remember for many years out of Pittsburgh, produced a newsletter, Estudio Cubano, no? That became a series
Began in 1972.
in 1972. But you were doing Cuba studies even before, and so it's a great honor, and we thank you from our hearts. That will be my last set of questions, but you're invited to come back. Perdón, Elena, but it'll be great. And now we can proceed,
Okay,
please, to your question.
no, I am really grateful that I have this opportunity to have this discussion with you, and to all of you to make it possible. Okay, you are asking a very, very difficult question, because, listen, in order to have social assistance, you have to have targeting. There is a big discussion all over the world about this. And there are people that say you should give, for instance, a pension to everybody, very tiny, small, flat pension to everybody. But really, this is feasible in developed countries because then through the tax system, income tax, you can take away the money that you are giving. See, if you are in a high income bracket.
Right.
Now, it's extremely difficult to do that, for instance, in Latin America. But targeting is essential, and targeting has to be done well. And there are tons of studies about targeting and conditional and non-conditional transfer and all these type of things. But everybody agrees targeting is essential. Why is essential? Because you want to have a method that you obviously cannot be perfect, but that you determine who really needs the help. But there is nothing like this in Cuba, really. And in fact, what the Party Congress, one of the resolutions says that if you are a beneficiary of social assistance and you have a relative that can help you, your social aid is terminated. And that explains why do you have this decline. But this doesn't make any sense because in Cuba, everybody is in need, except of course, a relatively small group of people that satisfy their needs, etc. And there have been no talk except Mayra Espino. Mayra Espino have mentioned this.
I know her work.
She's an expert on social policy, but I mean, it is impossible to answer your question. I tried to get figures on unemployment in Cuba, poverty incidence in Cuba. The latest figure available, believe it or not, is 2002.
A decade old.
2002, that's 10 years old. I give a series of reasons why I do believe that poverty incidence have increased in Cuba. And you have written about this.
Yeah, of course.
So I am quoting you actually.
Yes.
In part of it. So, but we don't know how many poor are. I have some estimate in the book, which is really frightening.
Right, that's...
But we don't know because the Cuban government, the first thing that the Cuban government has to do is to face this problem, acknowledge that there is poverty, don't use euphemism that population is risk for poverty. You say there is a standard international terminology for it. Say then poverty incidence of the population and households. And the second thing, you have to design fairly good techniques for targeting and assessing who really needs. Once you do that, then you can make the estimate. And then you can, of course, you can set the amount of aid that you are going to do according to your needs and resources. But it will be out of place for me to give you a ballpoint figure because, I don't know.
Yeah. we're still looking into those numbers.
Yeah.
Estimate. Well, I want to thank, again, Professor Mesa-Lago for a wonderful exposure. There's never enough time really to deal with the topic of Cuba, particularly when it comes to a book published by Carmelo Mesa-Lago, which is rich in statistics and discourse. And I'll invite everyone to acquire a copy of the book. I believe we have 2 copies left only. Here, we had a limited supply. And I want to thank everyone for coming to our conference, our book presentation under these circumstances. And once again, Professor Mesa-Lago, thank you so much for sharing with us. And a round of applause.